We're here at OFC 2025 in San Francisco, California. We're always in California, different city with this show. I'm with Sterling Perrin from Heavy Reading. Hey, Sterling, how are you?
Great to see you again.
Good to see you as well.
Good to hear another OFC.
Yeah, I know. We've got some telecom topics to talk about, and in a weird way, it feels like this is one of the years that that telecom is like the sideshow. At an optical fiber conference, but AI and the data center is kind of commanding, everyone's attention because of the scale out, the money that the hyperscalers are putting behind it, the incredible opportunity that everyone sees in AI applications. But that doesn't mean we can't talk about some telco stuff. Now, you were here earlier in the week. You went to the executive forum hosted by Optical.
Optical puts it on, yeah.
Yeah, and they're always talking about anything that moves the optics business ahead. So I'm sure you heard a little bit of both at that show. But what was the vibe there?
AI. It was all AI. In fact, 8 hours of not just AI, but actually really AI within the data center.
Okay.
That is the big trend. That's what's, so this show, it's from executive forum as well as just the show itself is a very positive vibe this year. I mean, it's a very upbeat vibe, but almost all of it is around optics being applied to within the data center, So, I mean, you've been to these things through the decades, and there's always been, how long did this transmission go? Thousands of kilometers, and this is like the complete opposite of that. It's within the walls of the data center for the most part, and then even how far can we put optics close to the chips in the switches that are in the racks, and even discussion of within the rack itself. So it's like very short distances with optical fiber.
It just seems to be a countdown between from now until the time that it's an entirely optical process from the computing to the transmission, inside the data center.
It is, and then so there's a battle at the executive forum. There is the battle between how far is optics going to go. Well, there's a couple battles, but one of them is optics versus copper, and where, and within. I mean, the consensus at the moment is within these racks, the data center racks, the AI racks. Right now, copper wins, but these optics people are trying to push the envelope and have at least discussions about when would it make sense to replace copper with optics in some of these, and it seems unlikely anytime soon is sort of the consensus, but they wanted to talk about it.
Well, there's an interesting thing because there are some hero experiments and a couple of startups that I've talked to that are working on optics in the data center.
Yeah.
The problem that they're having really, or it's kind of like the reason the market need isn't screaming for it right now is because the scale out is happening now.
Yeah.
And so the older technologies kind of win when it's like, okay, what do you have in stock now? What can I build with now? That's what NVIDIA buys, so therefore that's what, what goes.
Yeah.
But 2 to 3 years in the future, maybe when this dies down a bit, I think these optical startups will start to see some investment and maybe some traction on this. But we kind of have to wait and see. It's not, we're going to have to, the wind goes to copper for now, and we'll sort of wait.
Just within the rack, but there's an awful lot. I mean, there's an awful lot that optics can and is doing within the data center that's not in the rack. I mean, what they call the scale out, which is multiple, rack to rack to rack across the data center and the campus. Optics is everywhere, and that's where we're seeing all of the discussion right now around moving to 1.6T optics and moving to 3.2T in the future, and the discussions around linear pluggable optics, which removes a DSP power from the optic itself, and then discussions around actually coherent. One of the other kind of sub themes is coherent is moving closer and closer. It started in the long haul, but coherent optics is moving not in the data center, but kind of, in the campus environment. They're calling it coherent light, which is a kind of a featured down DSP that consumes less power and can transmit at this kind of in-between reach of from 2 kilometers to say 20 kilometers. So a number of vendors are announcing these coherent light Yeah. The other interesting thing on the data center, kind of it's outside of executive forum, but just thinking about the focus on the data center.
Right.
The telecom companies that have focused on coherent are themselves moving into the data center. So there were several announcements of data center optics from companies that have not been in the data center. So Ciena with a 1.6T, that's their very first entrance to Datacom. Cisco made a very similar announcement I think just before the show. And then Infinera, which is now Nokia, announced last year this thing ICD, which is just their optics. It's not the chip, it's not the DSP, but it's optics to go into the data center. And they're, as a newly combined company, they're more and more hyped on that particular aspect of the portfolio going forward. So everybody sees these massive optics volumes in the data center, or connecting data centers across pretty short reaches.
Yeah, the vendors have been pretty excited about it. In the component space, like for the telco market, short range optics and well, let's talk about 100ZR. Optics, because that's a coherent pluggables has been a big deal in this space. What's the telecom story here? Because I feel like there's not the volume that we're seeing in the data center space, or in the AI driven data center space. The telecom market seems to be a little stagnant and dominated by one vendor. Is that kind of what you're seeing?
Yeah, I think you're being even kind of too generous. I mean, telecom and this conference is kind of missing in action. And it's not that nothing is being done. It's just, you have to really dig to get anybody to tie. It's not really going out in any of the announcements. I mean, and this trend has been happening over the past decade, where the hyperscalers were at the conference, but they were just sort of, participants sitting in seats, to they're becoming more and more important on the agenda. And then I think at this point, and then there was sort of co-equal, where you'd have this panel, there's the Google guy, there's the AT&T guy, and now it's like only the hyperscalers. And I'm not seeing anything from the AT&Ts and Verizons and the really much for the cable companies, anybody really. It's just all
it's all data center, it's all cloud provider, kind of build out.
Yeah, it's
and that's interesting, because they basically are driving the market at that end. The issue or the thing I'm sort of wondering about is, because they're driving the market, they're driving higher and higher speeds.
Yeah.
Telcos are not ready to move to those speeds.
That's it. Yeah.
So what happens in the meantime, I guess?
Yeah, there was a time, maybe a short time. So as the hyperscalers were kind of gaining in prominence in communications industry, there was a time where their needs were, there was some sort of overlap in requirements, maybe in moving into, I don't know, maybe at the 400 gig pluggable stuff. It was driven by the hyperscalers, but the telcos were interested in it.
They were benefiting from the volumes.
They were, there was some, but it was starting to break away. Things towards modularity and automation and all that. That's fine. But then where we are now, and I think AI was the real thing that launched them in a different direction, is the hyperscalers are driving towards. We just talked about 1.6T, 3.2T.
Yeah.
And the telcos are 400 gig, 100ZR is of interest. So the degree to which they can benefit from the stuff that's being, driven by the hyperscalers, things they develop themselves, things that they go to any supplier and say, we want this, the vendor's gonna jump over themselves to do it. And the telecom is kind of being pushed to the side, and I don't know how much. From volumes, yes, they'll benefit from some stuff with pluggables, but a lot of the innovation they seem to be missing, and maybe they don't need the innovation. I don't know, but it's a very, I think, kind of an odd time for telco right now in optics.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to hear from the telcos and sort of see what their stance is on some of that.
Yeah, they may yell at me, but I'm just not seeing them. Back to the executive.
They're not going to yell at us here because I don't see any.
I guess not. Maybe they'll watch the podcast.
Right.
The executive forum, and maybe that's part of just the planning of the executive forum, but there was very, very little presence, and the presence that there was just out of sync from the rest. And it wasn't that they were raising concerns that aren't legitimate, but it would be like, the hyperscalers are talking about advancing their platforms quickly and moving higher, and then the telco guy saying, we just need to kind of step back and look at operations.
Right.
And then that was their comment, and then it was back to, well, we're going to drive to 3.2 and 6.4. So it's just very, just very diverged.
Well, I mean,
views.
It's not to say that AI won't affect telcos. It certainly will.
Yeah.
But not in the immediate sense that it is, affecting like the cloud providers and the data center companies and stuff like that. So what does the AI build out look like to telcos? Like, how is it influencing what they're doing or affecting them?
So far, this is one of the things I'm trying to learn a bit more at the show, and we've actually done a survey. It's not out yet, but kind of gauging telcos on telecom industry on what their impacts will be, but it's a big unknown. I don't think anybody knows really. It's not. I don't think there's not much impact right now, if any, because we talk about in the data center. From a traffic standpoint, because inside the data center, obviously not a telecom play, but even connecting the data centers. Well, take Lumen. What they're doing is they're just they're supplying. Well, they'll supply dark fibers.
Yeah.
So there is that. It's not really where telecom, I think, wants to be. They want to sell services and that. So, but the hyperscale, they'll build their own network, their own fiber, or they'll buy fibers from a Lumen and build their own networks. But the telcos aren't. I mean, aside from supplying dark fiber, they're not doing much.
Yeah, I think there's a hope that they'll be able to build a business, at least in Lumen's case, or build a business around essentially a customized network for whatever cloud provider or whatever AI company and that sort of thing. But that's also, we'll sort of wait and see, when that happens, because the build out is still we're still very early in this build out phase.
Yeah, I think there's a recognition that the hyperscalers are kind of out of scope for a lot of telecom.
Yeah.
When you get to the layers below the hyperscalers, they may have more needs for telecom to do things like, managed network, wavelength services and things like that.
Yeah.
And then the other piece is inferencing, where enterprises are actually using these models extensively, and unknown amount of traffic that would be generated from that would run over telecom networks. But it's not happening now, and nobody really has an answer.
Yeah,
it's just guessing right now. It's too early.
That's what we're finding that as well. It's really hard to nail down what that impact is going to be, or what it's going to do to the network, but also just what it's going to look like in terms of regional traffic and things like that.
Nobody seems to have any clue.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, we'll leave it there. I think that's a good place to leave it. We don't know yet, but stay tuned. And that's it from San Francisco at OFC 2025.
All right, great talking to you, Phil.